History says don't hope on this side of the grave. But then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. That poem by Seamus Heaney describes the Easter moment, hope and history coming together. That is Easter. Today, we celebrate resurrection hope. But there's an obvious tension, especially this Easter. Over the last year, we have learned to not get our hopes up, almost as a coping mechanism, a survival strategy. How many times did you plan something and then not be able to do it? How many times did you hope things would get better only to see them not get better or even get worse? Last Easter, we weren't even able to gather together in person, and not being at church together has been hard on us. The Barna organization came out with research just this week, sharing some things that church members had expressed they had missed the most. At the top of the list in the last year of what we missed the most was communion. Next was time together before and after church. A close third was in-person sermons. I'm just glad the sermons made the list at all. There have been some definite upsides. Here is a picture of a little kiddo's dollhouse reenacting online worship at home. This would not have happened over a year ago, probably. There have been some really wonderful things that have happened, and yet there have been a lot of times where we just haven't wanted to get our hopes up. At Christmas, I told a story about the bad luck my daughter had last year with her pet hamsters. I can't believe I'm talking about hamsters again. But in 2020, we had so many hamster funerals that we ran out of spots in the yard, and I ran out of things to say at the funeral. So at Christmas time, we drove to Indianapolis to rescue a hamster, and it was this glorious story. Christmas was also a rescue mission, and God came to us to save us. That's great sermon stuff. But we woke up at 5 a.m. on New Year's morning to find that hamster had also died. Just in case we had gotten our hopes up that 2021 was going to be easier somehow than 2020. At one point in 2020, one of our kids had to cancel something important, and I asked if he was having a hard time with it. He said, "No, not really. I've gotten used to not getting my hopes up." And we all get it, don't we? Not hoping is a way to get through life. It is a very human coping strategy. But Easter dares us to get our hopes up. Coming out of this pandemic, we need to give ourselves permission to hope again. We need to choose to risk hope as the resurrection people of Jesus. Now, that does not mean just longing to get back to the way life used to be before the pandemic or before whatever it was that taught us that life is hard. No. Easter hope dares for us to look at the new thing that is already happening, even in the midst of all the bad things. It is always hope that emerges right there in the midst of the doubt and the confusion and the grief. And that's why I think I like that poem by Seamus Heaney. It's honest. Perhaps hope and history don't collide or completely overlap, but that doesn't mean that hope and history can't rhyme. And that is the Easter message. On the other side of every grave, there is something new. Death no longer has full sway over our lives or over our world. Redemption is always the truest possibility. The Easter story is about daring people to get their hopes up. Those grieving women, disciples of Jesus, walked to the tomb in the very early morning hours to prepare his body for burial. They arrive to find the stone rolled away and to find the body not there. They are dumbfounded. The Bible uses the word for perplexed, or to be at a loss, or to be in doubt. Later, when those same women go tell the male disciples what they had seen, nobody believed them. They thought they were talking crazy. Easter seems to bring more questions than answers. Ironically, religious people can actually have a lot of trouble with doubt and disbelief. Somewhere along the line, we got the message that faith meant to have the right belief and the right answers. Instead, what we read in the Easter story and in the Bible is that people had a lot of doubts and a lot of questions. And yet, right there in the midst of those questions and doubts of being at a loss, two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them, and they asked their own piercing question: why do you look for the living among the dead? Well, the answer is pretty clear, isn't it? They're looking for a dead man because their friend had in fact died. Are the angels scolding them for doing what you do when someone passes away? Or are they challenging them to hope, as crazy as hope may seem at the time? Not only had their friend died, but Jesus had been killed. He had been stopped. Everything he spoke and everything he stood for had been silenced, so they thought. Rome had done what empires do when power is threatened. Religious people had done what they do when belief is threatened. History had played its main trump card. Jesus was killed, and killed in the most dramatic way, in the most shame-filled way, as an example to all of us not to get our hopes up, not to push too hard. In case there's any question, death always wins. But on Easter, on that morning, this is the thing that is called into question. Hope and history come together, and at that intersection, we discover some things that make hope just as risky today, but just as important as it was on that first Easter. Let's talk about that. The first thing that we see is that Easter hope confirms God's complete commitment to us, to his creation. The story of Jesus reveals God's deep commitment to us and to the world. Now, sometimes people talk about the death of Jesus and the cross as if it is some kind of contract that we had to make between us and God, some contract that was necessary between sinful people and a righteous or even angry God. We talk about the cross as if it was required for God to relate to us. But in truth, the cross reveals something else. It reveals the truest nature of God. The cross doesn't change how God sees us. It changes how we see God. God, as we discover, is not up in heaven distant from us. He is down here on a cross bleeding with us. Such is God's complete commitment to his creation. And there is a message in this for us. If you and I want to be committed to hope, we also must be committed to the deep and costly engagement that Jesus demonstrates, the engagement of love. We sometimes talk about the world's problems as if they are intractable, that they can't be solved, but Easter dares us to think something different and to actually believe that they are not unsolvable. The problem of our world is not beyond hope. The problems of our world are not beyond hope, but they are beyond easy answers. They are beyond shallow engagement. We cannot stand at a distance and love. We cannot not suffer and hope. We cannot love in a hypothetical way and have hope. So if you want to be hope-filled, This is what the cross teaches us. If you want to be hope-filled, then get your hands dirty and get your heart broken. Get in the trenches and love actual people. Engage the world the way Jesus did. Pay the cost of love, but don't count that cost. Love extravagantly and give the result over to God. This is what it means to have Easter hope. Easter hope is also proven by presence. If the empty tomb raised all kinds of questions, then the answer to those questions to a person, one by one, came in an encounter with the living Christ. In other words, sometimes we think about doubt as something that we need to solve intellectually. What Easter teaches us is that those questions and those doubts are answered relationally. And this was true to a person, Mary Magdalene. She comprehends that it is Jesus in John's gospel when Jesus says her name. In Luke's gospel, two people walking on the road to Emmaus have their eyes opened and they recognize him in the breaking of the bread. And they say to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us when he walked with us on the road?" Later, Thomas, the great doubter in the story, with all his doubt, will eventually touch and see and believe the risen Jesus. To a person, their cognitive dissonance isn't resolved intellectually, it is resolved relationally. The thing that changes everything is not just the empty tomb, but the risen Christ. They meet a risen Jesus, and hope resonates in each of them in that encounter. The same is true with us. It's the same encounter with the living Christ that ties us to the original story. We are a lot like those women or those first disciples or the countless others who have doubted and questioned and wondered what the empty tomb means. We, like them, have had a lot of questions. We're not the first to go through life struggling to hope. What ties us to the Easter hope is what makes us Easter people. It's this encounter with the risen Christ. And in this encounter, hope and history rhyme in us. It is true of the Christian story throughout the ages. Our connection to hope is a connection to Christ himself, who is with us, who lived and who died and who was raised again and who now sits at the right hand of God. So in this way, faith and doubt aren't enemies as we often make them out to be. They live together in us. You can still have doubts, you can still have questions, and you can still know Jesus. And actually, if we're honest, it's probably the only way to do it anyway, this side of the grave. Ultimately, Easter hope is lived out in a community of hope. The most obvious, but maybe most overlooked aspect of the Easter story is that it created a new community of people in the world. Easter invited people into something new, into a community of those who have decided that hate and evil and death do not have the final word. And we have gathered together as a people every single Sunday morning since that very first Sunday morning. Why? To keep our hopes up. And in this determination to hope, we find our unity. We find our one singular unifying principle. More than anything else, this is what makes us followers of Jesus. More than our nationality, more than our race, more than our gender, more than our political allegiances, or even our religious denominations. One thing overrides every other thing that might divide us. One hope unites us. The determination to hope is why we came to celebrate Easter in the springtime. as new life was bursting forth all around us, it is as if the very earth was calling us to dare to hope. It has been said, the church is the colony of heaven in a country of death. This world, with all its issues, is also the place where God's redemption breaks through. And the church has decided to be the place to notice it. Think of it this way, you can go anywhere, you can turn on the news, you can have a conversation, you can be part of any organization that will point out where the problems are. But where are you gonna go to have the courage to find out where the hope is? To risk it in light of and breaking in the midst of all the reasons not to hope. Here is the world, Frederick Buechner wrote. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. Or as the fashion designer Lily Pulitzer said, and I know I'm probably the least qualified to talk about fashion. I know this lady probably has made some of y'all's Easter dresses and is known for bright, colorful patterns. She said this, despite the forecast, live like it's spring. And so this is our invitation today, an invitation that is extended to us as it was to those first Easter people, to those of us who have faced sickness and pandemic, who have faced disruption and doubt, who have experienced exhaustion and frustration and death. Easter invites you not only to hope, but to join a community of hope, to unite with those who keep their hopes up so that they might see God's redemption breaking forth even when others don't. That we might become a people in whom hope and history rhyme.